So, the GLR front end. The GLR manual, and a lot of other manuals, leave a lot to be desired. What I mean by that is they expect you to have some sort of knowledge about building cars and how they function. Hopefully I can give you some of that. I can't teach you everything, but I can show you some of the things specifically with this car that would be nice to have in the manual at some point. And it's a question a lot of people ask, and it's about the balls here. They have like a ridge on the inside on one side, and which side goes up, which side goes down. The manual doesn't say. I put the ridge down, and I'll explain why. The only thing that's really important is that you do the same thing on either side. So, and people generally comment on, well, it's difficult to get these things apart if you want to loop it up. I had that question asked, how do you actually do this? Because I don't want to take the whole front end apart and pull this pin out. You don't really need to. I removed the spring for some other purposes, but you can actually push down all the way down here, and you should be able to. There you go. So that's how you get the hub or the spindle or whatever you want to call it out. So the ridge I'm talking about, it's unbelievable difficult to see. If you have one of these, you will know what I'm talking about, the ridge in the balls here. I've pointed it down because this kingpin here has a little ridge here, and it fits very nicely up into this. So in that way, I don't need to account for it when I'm putting in or removing shims. It just disappears up in this, and the shim is actually resting on the ball. So it's just a preference. You can turn it the other way around, doesn't really matter. I just do this because it seems more logical. And the next thing is how you actually set ride height on these. So ride height is controlled by shims in this car, and the more shims you put, I'll explain it like this. The way you put it in is just find the bottom one and then guide the top hole here, slide it in. The way you do it is that the more shims that goes underneath down here, the lower the car will sit. So if you move this up, the whole car goes down, and in effect the car becomes lower. So the more shims you have underneath, the lower the car will be. What is a good setup? What is a good ride height? The lowest you can actually get. That would be my answer. That is generally the setup theory, that the lower the car is, the lower the center of mass, the better the car handles, the better the car drives, the better it is in big sweepers. So that's how you set the actual ride height. The top up here, it does. Well, okay, I can explain it like this. It's a bit difficult both to look at the camera and. So it controls preload of the spring. If this wasn't here, this would be flapping around. Oh, sorry. If this would be flapping. If this shim wasn't here, this would be flapping around. So this would be controlling the preload. The factory amount here, it's good for most occasions. So just keep it like that. Yeah. I haven't experienced somewhere where I needed to move this in another position because the GLR is so low from the start. So I just used two, I think it's 0.3s. Let me just see. No, it's 0.2s, 2.2s. So a 0.4 millimeter on the rear, and that gives me about 2.2 millimeters of. No, it's 2.1, I think, in ride height. And the other thing it doesn't explain in the manual is how this should actually be. So when I talk about the upper control arm here, it needs to move freely, but it doesn't need to have slop. It doesn't need to have this excess amount of clearance. It needs to move freely, but it doesn't need movement this way. So how do you obtain this? Well, in this it was quite easily, because with this aluminium upgrade here, and when people talk about aluminium upgrade, yada yada yada, it's quite annoying to listen to people on YouTube that got this car and say, I just put on aluminium steering knuckles and now it handles so much better. It doesn't handle better because you got aluminium knuckles. It handles better because you did something to the geometry or something else like that. That small amount of weight or lack of slop or something, whatever it did, it's not attributed to the fact that it's aluminium. It's attributed to the fact that it changes some characteristics of the dynamic of the suspension setup or throw or something like that. So just to clear that out, this is mainly a part for not durability but for precision, because the upper control arm's plastic bit, the one that comes standard in these kits, it's floppy. I don't know if there's a better word. It's very soft. It's very pliable, the plastic, so this doesn't become very precise. And with the speed that these cars can go, you need this to be precise. You don't need the aluminium control arms and something like that. 1/12 scales, they have used plastic arms for before the before the start of time almost, and they're still using them, so they're perfectly fine and capable for the job. I used a shim. It comes in the set. You just need to find them. They're very thin. It's a 0.1 in this, and if you can see this, there's ever so slight, and it just needs to move like this. It needs to drop under its own weight. If you put it in a shim and it locks up, and if you remove a shim, it's got too much, and you had that, and you don't have a thinner shim, then you can always just remove a little bit of the plastic. Do not remove the aluminium, because this will break and you will need to buy a new one. And if you've modified the aluminium, you will need to space this out or something like that, because you ground it out with a file. Always go for the cheapest part. In this case, it's the plastic one. So if it binds when you put in a shim, and if it's too loose when you don't have a shim in, then put in the shim and just gently on the, this is Mini-C arm, but it's the same concept, on the inside here. So this will be on the inside part of the control arm here, the plastic. Ground out. Install. Check if it does this. If it still doesn't, take it off. More. Until you get this. And then you're done. Then this is what you want. And the final thing, I'm not going to go through spring setup and stuff like that, because I think I covered it in my basics and it translates directly into this. It's how to loop it up. This is a 20K, but I can't talk about the springs. Normally you would say that a softer spring, it provides more steering. It's generally used for bumpier tracks, and you say RCP tracks, are they bumpy? Yeah, some assemble RCP tracks better than other. Somebody have a carpet underneath that tends to warp a little bit and become, so that's an option. The harder, the less steering. It's better for the a smoother track. It's also easier to drive a harder front end, but you have a tendency that it can traction roll with that. That out the way. So the loop. The way you loop these are also quite simple. The bottom part here is the only thing that's actually moving up and down in these ball joints here. So that's the part you want to loop. So this is 20K. Normally for a low traction track, you would use a thinner silicone grease, or you would use a lower silicone grease. It's called 20K or 10K, 20K, 30K, all the way up to 1 million or even beyond that. But I tend to stay in a range of 10,000 as my lowest for low traction tracks. And for high traction tracks, I use 30,000. This is a 20,000. And the only thing I actually do is I just dip. That it is. I just dip this down ever so slightly. Take off a lot of the excess. Align the holes so the hole points out. Then you can actually put this in. And with your other finger, hold this. And then you have looped it up. There's no spring in here. It's back here. So this is what you have done now, and that's the looping process. It provides dampening to the spring, so it's not undampened springs. It calms the front end down. I tend to say that it doesn't really make your car faster, but it makes it more precise, and that's what it needs to do. The last thing here in the front end of the GLR is how much play does there need to be in the front end, and I tend to say as close to 0 as you can actually get. This has been shimmed out, so not a lot of movement there. No, sorry, but it moves. It should move freely like this. So what you actually do is, these shims are in the kit as well, or if they're not, they're very cheap to buy, and you shim it out. Start with a shim, or if it's really bad, you can feel it when you put on the actual tire here. I'll just put this in 1 second, and you would want, as I said before, as little play as possible. And because it doesn't necessarily make your car faster, it just makes it more precise. And what precision gives you is more consistent lap times. This is going absolutely terrible. And that would make your car, finish in the first place. There you go. So what I tend to do in these cars, the Mini-Z doesn't have a stop, like a axle stop. These does. So this will actually be tightened all the way in, and the tire will still roll. So use that, because that is your stop point, and shim after that. So this here has 0.1 shim, and it's not there. This has a 0.1. Oh, sorry. And a 0.15. A 0.15 is one of my own. It doesn't come in the kit, but the 0.1 does. And there you have it. You have a shimmed out front end. And if you need to know anything about setup, there is other videos here. Until the next one, see you guys.